Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
Good afternoon and welcome to the Microsoft Research Visiting Speaker Series. My name is Kim Ricketts and I manage the series with Kirsten Wiley. I hope you can join us next week as well on February 8th when Stephen Levy, who is the Chief Technology Writer at Newsweek, will be here at Research to discuss his views on the creation and implications of the iPod, something he calls the perfect thing. But today, I'm happy to introduce to you Joseph Turow, who is the Robert Louis Sheehan Professor and Associate Dean of the Graduate Studies at Annenberg School for Communication in Philadelphia. He is the author of Breaking Up America, Advertisers and the New Media, among other books, and he's also the editor of The Wired Homestead. Dr. Turow's recent work is on the rise and implications of databases as marketing tools. And when critics or bloggers are commenting on your recent book, which they are, the most common term used is disturbing. While collecting information on customers and targeting advertising is actually not new, technology has given it a new life and perhaps taken us down a path where all advertising, product offers, news, and entertainment will be customized. Turow argues that this not only creates a mistrustful and cynical citizenship, but also a very isolated one with no common culture. Can it be stopped, and should it be? That's what Dr. Turow is going to discuss with us today.
Thank you, and thanks for the hospitality you guys have given me. I don't know that you know that, but they put me in a very nice hotel and, give me good food, so I appreciate your... I was saying that my son is actually working this week in Microsoft for Accenture. So we came over together. He went home for the weekend. So it's nice from that standpoint, too. I hope in the 45 minutes, Kim described what I was doing, essentially gave the summary of what I'm going to end up partly saying. But I hope to say things that you'll be interested in asking me about, and I'll leave about 15 minutes toward the end for questions. What I'd like to do is cover a number of topics. That's where it is today. First, the historical context of the change that Kim was referring to, this rise of database marketing and some of the issues connected to it. National survey findings on the public's awareness of the rules of the road. What do people know about what's going on, and what might some of the implications of that be? The last one, possible social consequences and issues for media and marketing firms. So these are the topics that I'll be talking about. If you read trade magazines and talk to people in the industry and go to trade and advertising conferences, I think you can't help but conclude that the advertising industry is experiencing an identity crisis. Okay? I wouldn't even call it the advertising industry anymore, and we could go into that. This is from a not too long ago article, well, it's 2 years ago, article in Fortune magazine called Nightmare on Madison Avenue. And other metaphors that have been used are things like the foundations are cracking, an earthquake. And some of the reasons you can see are right up there. Many of you may be familiar with them. I'll just outline the idea of fragmentation. We all know this. You turn on your TV. Many of you probably have digital media, digital television, over 100 channels, 200 channels. The networks have been going nuts about this. Recession in terms of advertising agencies, where are they getting their money from in an era where other kinds of services, public relations, various kinds of product placement, we'll talk about that, are coming up. Fed up clients, TiVo, which is really changing, and of course I'm talking about DVRs in general, digital video recorders are changing the way people use media. Even older people like me. I mean, I was leaving a couple of days ago for here, and my wife said, could you DVR Heroes for me? And when Heroes is against 24, people begin to make decisions in terms of DVRs. So it's a very different idea than appointment television. Okay? All of this stuff, and of course when you have a DVR, you can run through the commercials. And that raises what advertising people have almost brought to the point of ethical issues. I mean, is it ethical to go over a commercial? And if we had the chance, we could talk about the history of this. The extent to which people have always thought, well, if advertisers are paying for this, you have an obligation to watch the commercial, to read the ad. And when you didn't, it was maybe because the ad wasn't good. Now there's technology to run across it, and what does that mean? And there's been lots of discussions within the advertising industry about this. But ultimately the question is the 30-second commercial dead? I mean, that's the way people talk about it. And it encapsulates an enormous number of issues. And so it says, and the ad industry is caught up in this wake. And we could go into lots of discussions about what all this means, and some of it I'll allude to. What I want to do is put this in the context of the 20th century development of marketing and advertising in American culture, and then talk about how that's changing in the 21st century. And if you go back into the 20th century, advertising was quite a confident industry. It's hard to imagine that in the 1920s, for example, people in advertising were lauded. There was a book that Bruce Barton wrote about Jesus, saying that he was the quintessential advertising man. Okay? It's called The Man Nobody Knows. Part of the reason for this is that advertising was associated with a rise in American industry and standard of living. And that, in turn, was associated with the rise of the department store and a whole new way of thinking about goods and prices. The idea was that that department stores, for the first time really, were showing people a cornucopia of goods that they didn't see typically. If you went to a merchant, you would go to a merchant who would deal with you and your income class. You went into a merchant and you would argue about prices. Americans hate to argue about prices, and oftentimes they have to do it with cars and stuff like this. But the department store, for the first time in the mid-19th century, gave people fixed prices and let them see all goods for them that they could afford and they couldn't afford. Everything was laid out, and laid out quite beautifully. And they saw a panorama of goods. And these goods, as I say, were priced. They knew what it was. They could compare. And it was a very different idea of what it meant to go shopping. This is an early department store in Manhattan, Stewart's department store. These were citadels of the new way of life. And with the rise of the department store came the idea that advertising was important in the Industrial Revolution to make Americans keep the economy going. Now this clashed with the traditional aspect of American culture, meaning envy. Until the 1870s, 1880s, women's magazines and other parts of society kept on saying envy is terrible. For example, you shouldn't make dresses that make you look more wealthy than you are, even if you make them yourself. And there was a real interesting question of how do you reconcile envy with the idea of living in a society where goods are the engine of that society, you see. And so the idea of what it meant to be envious began to change. And the notion began to evolve that it was important for people to look up, to try to get better, to try to match their neighbors, because that's what kept America going in this new world. You wouldn't want to go overboard with it, but what began to evolve was the idea of keeping up with the Joneses. Now today we kind of say that almost humorously, but back in the 19-teens, 1920s, this was a very serious idea. It was the notion that you have to try to be as good as your neighbor, try to wear the same kinds of things, of course maybe distinctly for you, but still keep up with a level of income. And that would help you, it would help you do better in your life, and it would help American society. And that became the kind of advertising mantra of the 20th century. That's what advertisers relied on as the basic bottom line assumption in what they were doing. Now, that works okay, except for the fact that in the 21st century, and I'm obviously making these distinctions in an artificial way, by the late 20th century, a lot of the infrastructure of advertising began to fall apart. Part of the problem was that the notion of the mass market reaching everyone became less and less possible. And even by the 1980s, it became less and less desirable. Again, we can't go into all of the differences that's in the book of what happened during that point in time, but just to mention a few things. The rise of the 800 number, the rise of geodemographic targeting, the ability to reach people specifically through various media, the segmentation of media, all of these things began to push marketers out of the mindset of reaching the largest number of people all the time. And they began to think in terms of breaking people up into specific groups, and then began to think of who's more valuable than who else. Now, of course, to some extent that has always existed. But in the 80s and 90s, the notion of going after your best customer became the mantra. I don't know if you ever heard of the 80-20 rule. The 80-20 rule basically being that 20% of your customers really make 80% of your revenues or profits, depending on how you want to look at it. That increasingly became the way of thinking about things. It's harder to get a new customer than to cultivate the ones you already have. And then the question is, how do you follow the ones you already have? How do you begin to think about them and relate to them and people like them? And so you have a very different idea about what advertising is and what marketing communication is. Back in the 20th century, the notion of advertising was the ad agency with the traditional creative research and then the various media buying operations in the J. Walter Thompson full-service ad agency as the quintessential model. Okay? On the periphery, you had a variety of businesses that existed, but were considered somehow not as good as advertising. Businesses like public relations, although in the corporate sector that was very important. When it came to consumer goods, not that important. Promotion, publicity, coupons, even product placement existed. You know, people don't talk about this as if it's something old. Product placement is an actually pretty old activity. You can go back into Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer in the 1930s and see that they had a product placement department. And I show my students Andy Hardy movies from the 1940s where Western Union is placed directly into the film, integrated into the plot line. Fascinating. But it was something nobody wanted to talk about, and certainly the advertising industry felt superior to it. Now, when people talk about the redefinition of advertising, as I first showed you in the second slide, and say there's an earthquake going on, things are totally tumultuous, the implication of people in the trade press even is, we should start from scratch, it's a whole new world. What I would like to suggest is it's not a whole new world. What's happening is that the advertising people are taking some pieces of the past and creating new syntheses of old activities in ways that are creating new forms of marketing communication. So that direct response, which used to be called direct mail and then direct marketing, is a whole new part which is now merging with traditional advertising, which used to be, God forbid we should do stuff like that. I mean, it used to be just selling knives at 1 o'clock in the morning. Product placement, the same thing. It's become much more of a mainstream activity. And image display advertising, as you guys probably know, merging with the idea of what it means to do direct marketing. And they're coming together in an online and offline industrial logic focused on the niche and even on the individual. Now, what I'm going to be talking about doesn't mean that it's happening now, okay? We're at the cusp of things that are going to take decades to evolve, okay? And so sometimes when I talk, people say, well, this isn't going to happen now. It's not even going to happen in 5 years. I'm not interested in 5 years, 10 years. What I'm hoping to suggest, and what I think the book tries to suggest, is there is an industrial logic in the online, offline media and marketing worlds which point in certain directions, obvious directions it seems to me, about how marketers are going to relate to households and to individuals. And that's what I'd like to talk about to some extent. New retailing and media regimes are evolving. Okay? And what I mean by that is that we shouldn't just talk about typical media, and we shouldn't just talk about online. To me, the distinction between online and offline is absurd nowadays. You really can't make that distinction. And if you really want to understand what's happening in media, go to the supermarket. Okay? People don't tend to realize how important the supermarket is to understanding what's going on in the marketing/media world. The supermarket is a media extravaganza with radio and displays and mats and television and computers, the point of service machines. Okay? So we're not just talking about the online world here. We're talking about an evolving environment in which people are being looked at across various platforms. And Microsoft is very involved, by the way, even in these platforms, as you probably know, not just in the platform of the online world. And the industrial logic, and again, I can't go into this in tremendous detail, is based on a number of characterizations of what should be done. One, data mining, which is the notion of trying to track people, trying to figure out what characteristics they have, and figure out how to deal with it analytically. Screening for appropriateness. Once you have their data, are they appropriate or not? Some people are just, you throw them out. They're not interested, throw them back into the sea. Okay? Targeted tracking. Once you know where they are, you try to track them. And we could talk about that online, of course, behavioral marketing, behavioral targeting, or we could talk about location-based, which is a fascinating growing area, location-based marketing. Interactivity. Once you track them and locate them, you interact with them. Mass customization. The notion of deciding what niches people are in based upon the various characteristics that you have about them, and either tailoring individually for them, which today is still quite expensive, or having mass customization based on particular niches that you think they belong in. And then the cultivation of relationships based on those activities. And these are iterative, meaning it's not just in this direction, and it goes back and forth, and they work against one another and into one another, and they're continually updated. So in the best world from the standpoint of an online site or a supermarket, they're continually getting more information. I was reading about a personal health records company which basically says to people, you have to come back and keep adding to your data. And part of the reason is because they want you to have an updated health record, but another part is because they're showing advertising in the site, and they take the advertising, they take the data you have given them, and anonymously, of course, cast up advertising based upon the data. So the more recent your data is, the more logic they have in terms of selling those particular data to advertisers. So all of these things interact with one another in a continual way, ideally. Now, again, the possible consequences, what I would call a niche envy environment. This, again, is a speculative notion, and part of the notion is not to say that I haven't seen it happen. I don't have specific research. I'll show you the research that we do have on this general area. But just some suggestions of what kind of environment with those characteristics might evolve. First of all, of course, people receive different discounts, ad, and media content. This happens all the time, still, now. You go into the supermarket. I don't know if you know the Catalina printers. You know what I'm talking about? These long coupons that you get that are not directly from what used to be called the cash register. They're on a little printer on the side. What Catalina marketing does is it tracks you for about 102 days, not by name. It's a little like a cookie being put in. It analyzes your shopping patterns. And then when you buy something, it prints out a coupon, not based necessarily on what you've bought now, but what you have bought over the last 100 days. And so the person in back of you may get a totally different coupon, maybe with more or less money, even for the particular thing. So for example, if you've bought IAM's pet food in the past, maybe IAM's doesn't want to give you a coupon. But the person in the back who bought another pet food might get that coupon. Or maybe you'll only get 40% off. The person in back of you will get 75% off, 75 cents off. Okay. So this stuff happens all the time on a whole variety of levels. And of course, frequent flyers, another area. But this, and media content, increasingly, people, of course, are getting different kinds of articles and different ads online in particular, but to an extent in mobile media as well. The notion, some concern here, is people live in increasingly tailored worlds. This is an interactive phenomenon. It's not just imposed upon by marketers. We all like to get content we want to get when we want to get it. And the notion here is that increasingly we'll be happy. A lot of people say, this is great. I get what I want. I get when I want it. And the notion is, however, it's real easy, and I see it myself, to encase yourself in a world that's my Google or my Yahoo, where all your news is specifically designed for you. And increasingly, there was a rumor, I haven't been able to track it down, I don't know if it's true, that newspapers are even sending, some newspapers, sending different editorials to different zones in their distribution area, depending on what they think the political environment of the area is. I don't know if that's true. Okay? But that could logically be the case, and people feel good about it. it's great to have individual feelings of, wow, this is terrific for me, but from the larger societal standpoint, is it a good thing that people live in increasingly tailored worlds where they're separate from one another? Can you talk at the water cooler? If you saw 60 Minutes last night and I saw 60 Minutes last night, did we see the same 60 Minutes? Maybe you got an old Itzhak Perlman interview and I got something with Bono, and we can't talk about it, because they have different demographics than I do and you do, and so a concern that people in the best niches will get the best deals. And people are concerned already about these sorts of things. And impressions I had I did a Washington Post online when the book came out, chat, and I saw people already are very concerned about it. Some person getting a different deal than another person. Some of them we already accept. You're on an airplane. You know that just about everybody is paying a different price on that airplane. Okay? But what happens if it's in a supermarket? What happens if it's in Toys R We? Okay? That's grammatically correct. So people in the best niche, and so you wonder, are you in the best niche? What do they think? And so the question, does this create a culture of suspicion, cynicism, and envy? And to some extent, an erosion of the public sphere. And we could play this out. And again, I don't want to be totalizing about it. But there is a sense of, do you begin to have a certain kind of paranoia about what they think of me? If you are treated in a certain way, do you think that that's because somebody knows something that they maybe shouldn't know? Or maybe they have some information that you didn't want to tell them. To give you an example, I once I called up Citibank for my credit card, and I got connected to a person in India who didn't quite understand American culture in terms of the stuff I needed to know. And while I have no problem with connecting with India, for example, in terms of other things, I really needed someone who understood American sort of retailing. And I began to say to myself, maybe, until recently I've been getting people in South Dakota. Do they think differently of me? Have they put me in a slot where I'm going to one part of the world and not another part of the world? Do you follow? And it turns out it's probably not the case. But you begin to get a little paranoid about this kind of thing. And what I would suggest that what Americans know or don't know about the marketing environment encourages their suspicion and anger at media and marketers. And you begin to see this, particularly as they get glimmers of an awareness of what's going on. The Annenberg Public Policy Center, and I'm head of a division called Information Society, has been conducting national surveys on Americans' understanding of new media and marketing since 1999. We did some really early stuff on parents and the internet with kids and like that. And the overall conclusion I would suggest is, particularly in the last two that we did, 2003 and 2005, people know their data are being used. They have quite a strong notion that their data, particularly online. But they know little about how the data are being used, and they know little about the rules of the marketplace when it comes to their privacy and their prices. And what we have found consistently is unbelievable about the level of lack of understanding. And when you tell people, I'm talking even reporters, education is not really that much related to this, but you'll see some of the things that people think, and it is amazing, A, that people think this, and B, when you tell them otherwise in conversation, they get angry, they get annoyed about what's going on. For example, 2003 and 2005 surveys found that, and this is a generalization again, I'll show you some data in a little bit, consumers understand that they are being tracked online, perhaps not offline. I think people are more concerned about online tracking than offline tracking, even though offline you're being tracked like crazy. As I suggested, by supermarkets, by your credit card company, by so many other places. But possibly for media reasons, the media talk about online privacy issues, partly possibly because people understand that online you can aggregate materials that you couldn't, perhaps, in an offline way. But at any rate, there seems to be much more an awareness, it seems. But they have no clue about data mining that goes on behind the screen. They really, if you ask them questions about this, they just don't understand how data are that they are connected, the dots are connected and used. And interestingly, they think that price discrimination is illegal, or as marketers would call it, price customization. They literally think it is illegal to do, and I'll explain how. This is most of my data here from a 2005 survey. International Communication Research, which is a firm outside of Philadelphia, did a national telephone survey, 1,500 adults who used the internet in the past 30 days as a margin of error. We asked similar questions across a number of years, so I have a sense that these data are reliable. You always get into a problem with whether, is this a sample that's a little askew? And so I'll leave that up to you. But they really do parallel the population as a whole, and we've had reliability across a number of years. Here's some true-false questions. True-false questions reveal Americans know they're being tracked. So if this is true-false. Companies have the ability to follow my activity across many sites. 80% say it's true. A company can tell that I have opened its email even if I don't respond. Of course, there's some cases where they can't do this, but in general, 62% say that's true. 84% of internet-using adults believe that some websites do track people, buy data, and selectively show ads. So people know those basic ideas. Yet Americans lack an understanding of what firms can do with information about them. Almost all, 89% of those who say their supermarkets offer frequent shopper cards took the stores up on them. So despite the fact that they know that people are tracking them, they use frequent shopper cards. I would venture to suggest that most people here do. It's hard to get decent prices if you don't use a frequent shopper card. But you pay for it with this enormous amount of information. Now, at this point in time, the supermarkets don't know what to do with most of this stuff. They have these data. They're trying to figure out how to analyze them and what to do with them. There are beginnings of a glimmer of these sorts of activities. But it's enormous, the data that they collect. Another statement, charities are allowed to sell their names to other charities even without their permission. 72% say that's false or don't know. Answer is it's true. A supermarket is allowed to sell other companies information about what they buy. 64% say it's 4% say it's false or that they don't know. It's true. Americans also don't know basics about privacy online. When a website has we've asked this question twice in 2 separate years in 2 different ways. Once we did it as true-false, once we did it as agree strongly and disagree strongly, almost exactly the same results. When a website has a privacy policy, that means the site won't share their information with other sites and companies. 75% say it's true or they don't know. Okay? They think that because it says there's a privacy policy, that means that their information is going to be secure. And if you want to break it down, 59% say it's true, and 15%, I think it was, or 16% said that it was that they don't know the answer. Okay? And we've asked that question in a different way, almost exactly the same finding. And it shows that the word, what I've been arguing is, and into the Federal Trade Commission as well, the word privacy policy is deceptive. People think it means something that it really isn't. It should be using your information or something like that. And Americans lack understanding about pricing rules online and offline. A site such as Expedia or Orbitz that compares prices on different airlines must include the lowest airline prices. 68% say it's true or that they don't know. And what's interesting, too, about that is when there is this, on the other hand, sense that people have that something is going on with airline sites or other sites when they go on and buy something. There is this sort of urban legend, and it turns out it's probably true, that various sites change the prices based upon whether you're coming back or not. So for example, if you've gone to a site, it puts a cookie in your machine, and it gives you a relatively low price. You go back next time, and it'll give you a higher price than your neighbor who's going there the first time, because the notion is the first time they want to suck you in. So there's all this stuff. And for many, when I was doing my book, it was very hard to get people to really tell me specifically that this is going on. Recently, the Wall Street Journal had a piece where some companies, not a lot, are admitting that they're doing this sort of thing. Okay? But most people don't know that. Americans are bothered by the very idea of price customization. One said, this is a statement, "It would bother me to learn that other people pay less than I do for the same products." 76% agree or agree strongly. "It would bother me to learn that other people get discount coupons get better discount coupons than I do for the same product." 64% agree or agree strongly. And they're unwilling to accept price discrimination. "It's okay with me if the supermarket I shop at keeps detailed record of my buying behavior." 66% disagree or disagree strongly. And yet they do, but through the frequent shopper card. "If a store I shop at frequently charges lower prices than it charges other people because it wants to keep me as a customer more than it wants to keep them, that's okay." Interestingly, despite that, 72% disagree or disagree strongly, even though it helps them. There's this notion of fairness there that bothers people. And of course, this goes on all the time. Now, I don't know if you know about electronic shopping labels, which are becoming increasingly common in supermarkets. They can change the prices instantly. So a supermarket, if it knows that senior citizens are coming into the store at certain times a day, it can change prices based on that. If different other people come in another part of the day, you can change the prices at the time based upon what you think the flow is in the store. And of course, ShopRite and Albertsons have been experimenting with computers that people walk around the store with, and you swipe your frequent shopper card, and it gives you selective discounts, which really means selective prices, based upon your shopping history. Okay? So this kind of stuff is becoming much more common, and yet if you tell people that this, if you ask them about it, somehow there's a seeming indignation. Americans admit to feeling vulnerable. "What companies know about me won't hurt me." 80% disagree. "I'm nervous about websites having information about me." 79% agree or agree strongly. This feeling of vulnerability, very partial knowledge of what's going on, and a stance against typical pricing activities suggest increasing public concern about new media/marketing activities. And as things begin to unfold, as people begin to realize it, some may well accept it, and some people may revel in the idea they're getting special treatment. See? But some people it gnaws, particularly if you worry that you're not getting the stuff that somebody else does, maybe because they have certain information about you. Maybe I should give them more. Maybe they need, and a lot of places will play on this, on the notion that if they know who you are, if you give us information, then you'll be better off, which is the whole idea of niche envy, right? If you want to be, instead of keeping up with the Joneses, we're moving into an era of niche envy, which says not just you should get the kind of stuff your neighbor gets. Now it is, if you want to be treated by marketers like your neighbors are treated by marketers, as well as your neighbors are treated by marketers, you have to give marketers information about you that will make them want to sell to you. You have to be in that 20%. So show us, essentially, that you deserve it. Implicitly, that's the idea. There's a lack of trust, interestingly. Sadly, only 35% of the people we surveyed said that he or she trusts the U.S. government to protect consumers from marketers who misuse their information. And the whole notion of trust is very complicated, and I can't go into it. I just wanted to show a little bit of this from our 2003 survey. We asked people 2 questions, and this is a table that attempts to sort of combine it. We said, within the next 5 years, do you trust this particular institution to protect your information or to help you protect your information online and not release it without knowledge or consent? And then we say, another question was, do you distrust this institution to help you protect the information? So we asked it twice. One is trust, one is distrust over the next 5 years. As you can see, people had an interesting conflict over trust and distrust. So, for example, with the government and with Microsoft, some people said they trusted and they distrusted. Okay? Neither, and again, these are variables that are brought together, means that below a certain point in agree strongly, disagree strongly, people sort of didn't care less. They neither trusted nor distrusted. Distrust means the percent who said they didn't trust and they distrusted. Conflict means they said they trusted and they also said they distrusted. And that may sound like a conflict, right? I mean, it sounds ridiculous. But it really isn't. Because sometimes I would suggest people realize companies are variegated entities. And the government may have parts which gives up information about you, just as it has parts that tries to protect information about you. And so there's a real sense that it's difficult to understand how to deal with companies from a trust standpoint or with other institutions. So the notion here is a challenge for marketers, for people who think about these sorts of things. I would suggest that it's important to encourage understanding by people about the media environment, if only to get them to talk about it so that we talk out some of these issues which are sometimes I think people consider ethical issues. Listen to people's concerns and fears, and I don't know that enough work has really been done about that. The level of misunderstanding that people have about the media environment is really amazing. And it used to be the case that people would simply turn on the TV set. Today it's much, much more complicated. And the stuff that goes on behind the screen is much, much more complicated. And lots of people have no idea. You know, I find that most of my students don't even really know what a television network is. They don't know what a television network is. And so when you ask them about other things, we think that teenagers and college students know so much about the web, they know so much about the online world. Yeah, they know how to download songs and stuff like that. But when it comes to really understanding the institutional dynamics, you know, and some of the issues around it, they don't have much more of a clue than adults older than they have. Transparency of information about people. It's easy for me to say this. But I can't find a single website which actually allows people to find out what information companies really have about them. You know, they'll tell you what you've told them about them, but they won't tell you the data that they have collected and how they've used it, okay, based upon tracking and stuff like that. Now, and we'll get into this, and choice in terms of that. It's very difficult. And even, I'm not just talking about the online world, I'm talking about offline, and especially with location-based marketing, which brings up a whole lot of interesting issues. And related to that is a concern that almost is a catch-22. How do marketers do these four things while accomplishing niche marketing goals? And to some extent, I think marketers feel that they have to get into that new era because of some of the earlier constraints that I've mentioned. So we're in a situation here where, you know, you're almost damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. For example, I read that Microsoft is thinking of telling people why they're getting certain ads. You know, what it is that we know about you that led us, you can click on something and we'll tell you what it is that we know about you that led us to serve certain ads to you, which is admirable. But you wonder, are people going to freak out about this? You know, are they going to say, what? You know what about me? How do I correct this? You know, so the whole, it assumes a bottom level understanding of what all this is about. And as I suggested, people sort of have a notion they're being tracked. But if you tell them, we're serving you this ad because we know you have an elementary school kid, you know, or it seems that you've just given birth, which they can tell, right, through behavioral targeting. You don't have to know the name of a person to do any of this. You know, in some sense, privacy is a red herring. Because while personally identifiable information is not insubstantial for marketers because they can append, they can data append. So for example, when you register for the New York Times, the New York Times often goes out and buys third-party information about you and appends it when they're serving up ads, you know, to you. But you don't have to do this. You can tell a person is pregnant by looking at, or at least infer it, by looking at what she goes on the web, by traveling with her across a variety of sites, and then making assumptions. And then when she starts buying baby food type stuff, you figure she had the kid already. You know? So these sorts of things, people don't realize this. And it would be freaky to start saying, oh, we're sending this here because we know X, Y, Z. So it's a real interesting dilemma that I would suggest people, companies are into here that may take years to sort out. But it seems to me we are inevitably in a world where these are going to be issues. Issues of privacy, issues of stories that are told about us, issues of worry that the stories that are being told about us are ones that we don't want told about us. I don't want marketers telling this about me. I want a different story told about me, about my kid, that leads me to get certain ads and not other ads, certain articles and not other articles. How do I change this? And the whole idea of what it means in a society to be traveling with certain ideas about yourself across a whole variety of venues. These are challenges that marketers and media companies are going to have to confront over the next few decades. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Amazon's way ahead of a lot of companies in this space. They recommend that maybe I want the 4th volume of Cowboy Bebop because I bought a CD that had the music on it, and I don't even watch anime, but I like the music, so they're not getting it right.
Right.
But they allow you to say, do you want this? No, yes, no, if you buy into, if you sign up, you say it's okay to do this.
Right.
And it's very interesting to see how they're coming at it.
Yeah, and of course they've gotten less and less primitive. They started out pretty primitive. People who bought this, who also bought this. It's in some ways it's great. But I get Rhapsody, and so when I load Rhapsody, which is a music service, I guess I have the password automatically going in, so I see the original, the sort of generic Rhapsody that disappears after 1 second. I'm thinking, what's the generic Rhapsody? In other words, you sort of know what. In a way, it's nice, but as I said, there's something odd as well about surrounding you. What story are they telling about you? Now, you can correct it to some extent, and you can, to some extent, correct it by buying other things. And Amazon knows, as other marketers do, that the same people don't always use the same computer. So if you register, if you sign in, they know more about you than if it's just the computer with a cookie. But you can buy stuff for friends, and they may think it's you, and who knows what they might think about you based upon things you bought for friends, and say, oh no, this is for friends, and down the line they may have a checkoff box, this isn't me, So who knows how people are going to deal with these sorts of issues.
Do you know any company, like say I call up or email Amazon and say, okay, this is my registration name, my user password. Tell me what my profile is.
You can't do that. As far as I know, I have not seen, and I've looked. Now, they may, the closest thing to this is some of the stuff that is required by financial firms, But in the general marketing world, in the consumer marketing world, there is, as far as I can tell, I have not found a single company that will allow you to look. Part of it is terabytes and terabytes of data sometimes. Part of it is they don't want to tell you, And so what they say is, you have a right to change and to know what you've told us. And a lot of people think that that's what they know about you. But that's just the tip of an iceberg. So we really can't know at this point. Yes?
You touched on sort of like Albertsons or the Safeway card,
Yeah.
where if I don't use the card, I pay 50 cents more for this jar of
Yeah.
soup or whatever. Have you touched on or seen any trends in terms of online websites? Like, if you register, we can help scope things better for you. Like, that's the benefit. It's something less tangible than money, There's some ads online where there's like punch the monkey versus something useful to me. Like, have you seen any trends in?
Well, there are counter trends to this sort of thing. I mean, one person who would critique me would say, after a point, there's going to be a reversal. So there may be places that don't have cards, don't have frequent shopping cards. Correct me if I'm wrong. Trader Joe's doesn't have a frequent shopper card. Am I right?
Yeah.
And so that, and some people would say that's great because, I don't have to do this kind of stuff. And but I was in Santa Barbara. I'm not answering your question directly. I don't know of any. What I'm suggesting is there may, in fact, evolve some places for certain kinds of people who don't want to deal with this on the web and elsewhere, where they can go and be happy, so they don't have to give this kind of money and still get fairly decent discounts. Walmart doesn't track you individually yet. Sam's Club does, interestingly enough. Okay. But I was in Santa Barbara. The supermarket near my house, which is owned by Albertsons, Acme, if you forgot your card, sometimes they'll give you a generic one and swipe. But I was in Santa Barbara, I'll never forget this because I'm a cheapskate, and I wanted to get a 2-liter bottle of Coke, and it was like $1.50 more. And I said, can you swipe it for me? And he said, no, we're not allowed to do that. You have to have a Ralph's card. And I said, really? He says, yes. You want to fill it out? And I wasn't about to stand there and fill out, despite my being a cheapskate. So I had to pay $1.50 more. And so some places are pretty stringent about this sort of thing. And it may be that there's going to be a revolt against it. But the importance of information is so great today that companies really do want to get that stuff from you. Yes?
Is there a difference in attitude outside of the U.S. In societies where bartering is maybe more common? Because you mentioned that, I know it was like with JCPenney when they started doing the one price for everybody,
yeah.
Right? Anyone who came, even people outside of the town, etc. So it's been in America for 100 years or whatever.
Yeah.
But in other societies, is the attitude about it different?
People are used to, if you go to the Middle East, people are used to bargaining. It's part of life. And Americans tend to freeze up, and they get almost nauseous, when it comes to this. And it's really only 150 years old.
But are the attitudes different in terms of feeling okay about different people getting different prices?
I think it's built into the culture. I don't know if that would be the case if they went to a department store. So it may be like a double culture. But that's an interesting question. The whole issue of privacy and discounts, and the EU has a more stringent set of privacy policies than the US does. And despite that, they are finding ways around it in order to do the same things that I've just suggested in the UK and elsewhere. Because there are ways to get around. As I said, privacy is not really an issue in a lot of this stuff. If you're doing behavioral targeting that doesn't link it to personal identifiable information, or if you simply get people's permission. So, for example, you're not allowed to send a person an ad on a mobile phone without their permission. But if a person goes to a website in a mobile phone, okay, the website can serve ads to that person because the person's gone to that website and probably knows that there's going to be ads on there. And if the website has a location-based marketing agreement, say, with the carrier, they'll know where you are and they can serve you a restaurant discount or whatever it is based upon who they think you are and where you're located and that kind of thing. Yes?
Do you differentiate at all between pull versus push marketing? So like if, to be in a niche marketing category, it sort of assumes a little bit that the consumer is a little bit more of a passive agent versus, someone who's going out and seeking these types of.
Yeah, but you can combine. This is a good point. But you can combine the two. So let me give you the example. These are real primitive examples. But let's say you go to with your mobile phone. You're going to a place in downtown Seattle, and there's a kiosk that says, "Take your mobile phone and shoot it at the kiosk, and we'll give you a discount to a restaurant." If it were just a passive thing, it was the same restaurant, everybody get the same coupon. You could conceive of a situation whereby your phone would tell the machine, okay, who you are by a code, and then it could actually iterate a particular restaurant with a particular discount depending on what the restaurant wants, which restaurants want which type of people. See? So that's a combination of push and pull. You follow what I'm saying? You're going to the ad, you're pulling it, you want it.
Right, but if I don't like that restaurant, I'm not going to.
You don't have to go.
Take the ad, right?
Well, of course, that's true. Another example of this is more push, I suppose, but it's something that they're really beginning to work on, and it's fascinating at the same time that it's a little icky. Cable companies right now don't do this, but there's experiments to use your set-top box to place information about your household in it, and eventually maybe you, so that an advertiser can buy and create a separate ad that will reorganize itself as it moves through the set-top box to show different people different commercials based upon what they know about the household based on the information in the set-top box. And this way it keeps privacy in the sense of the advertiser doesn't know, and no one at the head end right then and there knows about the information, but the information, there's a company called Visible World that's working on this. You can have layers of commercials, and the different layers of the commercials change based upon the characteristics that they want to put in. So you could have a Ford commercial for some people, a Jaguar commercial for other people, and like that. The question of pull is the ultimate issue. I mean, what marketers are hoping is that people will want to do this, and they'll raise their hand, they'll nominate themselves, okay? And particularly with mobile phones. Europe is far ahead, and Korea and Japan are far ahead of the US when it comes to this. And the idea is hand raising. I want to nominate myself as wanting to accept certain kinds of ads. And sometimes it's great. You say, yeah, I'm going to get the great stuff. I was talking to a consultant when I was writing the book, about Best Buy and other places like that, which are moving toward biometric identification going into the stores. What's fascinating is that, you know, the experiments I mentioned about Albertsons and ShopRite, where you walk through the store, that's different from the Catalina marketing. Remember I talked about that long coupon? The Catalina marketing coupon has one major flaw, even though they say that the response rate is higher than a typical coupon. The flaw is that people get it when they're leaving the store. So I typically pick it up and throw it away. I'm not very, even though I'm a cheapskate. So marketers say, well, how can we do it so that we know the people when they self-nominate, when they go into the store, okay? So it's a little like a pull. Now, self-nomination can be purposeful, meaning you really know what you're getting into, or it can be, gee, they're allowing me to email my marketing list to the computer. So when I swipe the computer, I'm going to email my marketing, I'm going to see my marketing list. So you can email it to Albertsons, for example. When you go into the store, they did tests in Dallas, you swipe the card against the little computer that you pick up, and you can see your list because it's customized to you. And then as you walk around the store, there's a location-based marketing thing that knows where you are, gives you different coupons, different discounts. It will tell you when your deli's ready, so you don't have to stand around the deli counter. So a lot of interesting things. So that's one way to do it. But the consultant said to me the next sort of iteration of this is biometric identification, where people will either eye scan or fingerprint when they walk into the store. Beep, so they know who you are. And already stores have profiles of best customers. So Best Buy teaches people how to identify the real customers that they should pay attention to. The clerks, they tell them when they walk into the store. But the biometric identification, so I said to this guy, who's going to want to do this? You know, how can you convince people to give their fingerprint when they walk into a store? And he said, it's simple. You tell them it's for their own security. Basically, the idea is no one can shop and make believe it's you if we know your fingerprint. So there's no way that somebody can steal your identity in this store. So there are ways to do this where people nominate, raise their hands, say that they're going to do it, which of course have marketing implications as well. Nothing is, you know, and it may be great for them. You may get a great discount on a particular TV set, but all the other issues that I brought up also enter into the picture. Yes?
So there was a move toward a system called CAPS 2 that the TSA wanted to implement, and that got killed, but it's kind of moving in the same direction as a lot of this stuff. They wanted to look at what you bought from supermarkets, ask Axiom what information they have on you, and take a look at where you live and what kind of neighborhood it is. And,
as a profiling technique.
Yeah, build a terrorism score based on your credit history. And understandably, the American public wasn't too comfortable with this, but I'm kind of wondering what moves you've seen for government to gain access to this.
Well, Checkpoint is another huge company that does this, and from what I hear, for example, the FBI and other government agencies will go to Checkpoint for information that they're not allowed to collect or get from government agencies. So there's a lot of handshaking between private and public companies from that standpoint. See?
Oh, okay, so there's like virtually no regulation on the marketing side.
Exactly.
So they can just be proxies.
Right. That's what happens. And there are other issues too that have to do with how you can use these information. There are very few regulations in the use of those kinds of data and the consumer marketing side, and so the government will pick it up. Exactly. Yeah.
So how would I make the government think that a powerful senator or congressman's a terrorist based on what they're buying?
Well, the question is, would they look at that person to begin with? See, but yeah, I don't know. I mean, you'd have to ask them. But what I think is just as interesting, and something that's a little more below the radar screen, is the way politicians are using these consumer marketing activities in election campaigns. And I'm no expert at that. There are other people at the Annenberg School who do a lot more with this. I study the consumer side, but of course, political marketers have a lot of money nowadays, and they have discovered that they could use these discriminatory variables to decide what types of people to reach in different neighborhoods and how to talk to them. So you don't even have to figure out that a person's a Republican. You can take an array of demographic and geodemographic variables and lifestyle variables and come up with a solution that says this person is likely to vote Republican, and maybe we should send this appeal to this person and this appeal to that person, okay? And go under the radar screen so certain people get ads that would offend other people, but those other people don't get those ads. Okay? So you can talk to different groups in different ways based upon massaging the data and the various databases that you have. So these are things that we'll see much more of that in the political campaign. And I think one of the sort of sub rosa messages of Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama and others showing up on their website, announcing their candidacy on the website. I guess it was Clinton and somebody else. Was it Obama too? I'm pretty sure.
Did a webcast as well.
Webcast, that's what I mean. Who did?
John
Edwards, right.
Edwards. Announced in New Orleans, did a webcast.
Yes, and I think that my own interpretation is one, you could break through the traditional media, you say everything you want to say, and two, it's to say, I'm here, okay, on this website. You can find me. And if you want to talk to me the way we should talk to you, come to us. So that it's a much, you begin, if people nominate themselves on the website, give information about themselves, they will get customized information based upon what these various marketers know about them. So, and that raises interesting questions for democratic policy, because with a small d, what happens when different types of messages go out? I mean, they've always gone out to different people, let's face it, but in systematic ways based upon various demographic kinds of issues. Yes?
Sorry, I don't remember if you had a quantitative measure of this, but what is people's comfort level with kind of like, because I shop this way, I get these coupons? I know people don't like the idea of getting a better price than other people, but what about just the idea of using information about them? So tracking your spending habits, so I get this pasta cheaper. Like, what is the general?
I don't remember if we had the specific exactly the way you phrased it, but my sense is that people are nervous about this because they don't want. They know they're being tracked, but when they're specifically told, if you give them a scenario, as we did in 2003, which essentially is a typical scenario of cookies being put in their machine and they get different messages, people say, "I'm going to leave the website. I don't want to be on this place." I'll go off the web. So they really don't want to have this, even though it happens all the time. You have to say this is naive. It's just a really naive view of what's going on. But it also shows how people are pretty ignorant about the way the world works when it comes to this. And I've come to the conclusion, it's easy to blame the customer, the consumer. People have a life. People are busy. They have kids. And so to expect people to know the intricacies of their computer and all of these sorts of things is maybe a bit much. And not only that, they don't learn it in school. The number of schools that teach economic education in elementary and high school is minuscule. I find of the 200 people a year I have taking mass media in society, maybe 3 have taken a course like that in high school. So the bottom line sense of education that people have about how the media work, how marketing works, how checkbooks. I have to teach my kids. I think in school now, some places teach you how to write a checkbook, how to write a check. But real basic economic education is rare in the United States. And then to ramp that up and talk about marketing education and what this all means and what some of the issues are and be realistic and follow yourself and track yourself. People have a life, and it's tough for them to figure this stuff out. Yeah.
So given you've identified this problem, what do you see as are the opportunities that come out of it?
Good question.
For example, it's the next, and you sort of went on this, was the next version of targeted advertising on the web something where not only does my machine learning system automatically build my profile, but I can go off and edit it so those advertisements are better?
Yeah.
Or is there some sort of transparency? I mean, what's the next step?
I think the ability to talk back to your profile is important. I don't think this is all bad by any means. So I do think, and I also think it's inevitable.
Right.
So I think to dismiss it and say ridiculous is not realistic. So I do think transparency is important. I think editing the profile is important. I think people have to realize that everybody tells stories about them. And the question is, how do we edit our own stories? How do we get people to understand who we want to be thought of? And how can we try to make sure that the wrong stories are not being told about us? Okay, and what does that mean?
So is there room for a web service that actually tracks what stories various marketing
But you can't, it's very hard to figure that out. I don't know if, right now, nobody's going to give you the data. If I went to my supermarket and say, give me a printout of everything I bought in the last 3 months, and I don't know how many analytics, what analytics they do, but give me a printout on the analytics that they'd look at me like I'm crazy, And not only that, they'd start charging you for it. So it's a tough issue. But yeah, I think in the best of all possible worlds, that would be great. And maybe down the line, people will do it. Mark? Oh, I thought you looked like.
Sorry.
I thought you're someone else.
I'm Rob.
Rob, hi.
I was curious if you've seen any companies that are actually giving people their profiles and letting them edit it kind of beyond what the social networking services are doing, and if there's any sort of experience or business model where that's been working.
I really haven't. I wish maybe somebody knows one that does. You're right, in the social networks there are. I haven't seen marketers do it. Did you know one?
Well, in social networking, as you said, actually, advertising is feeding to those profiles. So.
Right, but they're also tracking you in other ways. And of course, they're picking up on your profiles and using it, that's why MySpace is such a great place in some ways. Some advertisers are scared of using MySpace. But in some ways, MySpace is an interesting area because you're being given information over and above any kind of demographics that people give you when they sign in. And interestingly, I keep hearing that people really tell the truth when they register. Most people don't lie.
Except
which
underage kids in age.
Right, exactly. And it's fascinating that people typically don't lie. The other thing about lying, as I tell my students, is it sort of catches up with you in some sense because you begin to get different stuff, which may or may not be a good thing. But companies know this, that they check about that, and as I say, a place like the Times will actually data append, and there are other ways to try to find out. But yeah, it would be great, and I think there are opportunities for companies. And as I said, I think I've read glimmers that Microsoft is moving in this direction. And the question is, how do you do it in a way that won't freak people out, while at the same time allow them? And I think the public relations value would be enormous. And it could be framed as, what stories do people know about you, and what do you want to tell us? And then the issues of niche envy still remain, because maybe you want the stories to be that I'm like Bill Gates in every way except my income. What does that mean? But there is something to be said for a sense that people have that they control their information, because sooner or later they're going to read magazine articles, they're going to read this, that, and the other thing, that they're getting different things. They'll notice it. They'll talk to their neighbor. They'll find out that some people get X and they get Y. And when you have that situation, there's a kind of paranoia that begins to start around. And that may be more socially corrosive than we understand.
I was just going to say, I think if you take it to the next level, that paranoia kind of makes sense because there's so many more things that are being funded and driven by marketing dollars. I mean, you have the normal like stadiums or places or events that you're allowed to go to because you've bought certain things in the past. What if suddenly they're sponsoring, operations for people, but you only get the operation if you fall into a nice little bucket.
That's not inconceivable.
It's not,
right.
And that's where it's scary. It's not so much what data do they have about me, but what are they going to do with that data? And even giving them more data doesn't necessarily get me to where I want.
And Americans have been taught that you can be treated differently based on some things, mainly money. I've never seen fights over frequent flyer positions. You'll never see things like people in first class go into the plane first. You never say somebody say, "Hey, that's not right," Okay, so there is a kind of socialization that we have around this. And then there are some discriminations that we all accept. 65 and older get reductions, okay? Kids can get a reduction to the movies. And so you might say, 65 is not that old anymore. Why do they get cheaper movie seats than I do? And so, but we sort of accept that. But then there are other kinds of discriminations which take place under the table that marketers haven't wanted to tell us about. And that's the kind of stuff that you're talking about. And that's the kind of, and we accept things like 65 plus. And sometimes I was watching TV this morning. Now the pilots are saying we want to go up to 65 from 60. So we have different ideas of what age means. And 65 was a certain marker at a certain point in time, mainly the Depression, for Social Security. And they have a symbolic value. But we haven't advertisers put more symbolic value on these sorts of things than people think they do. It's fascinating. Reading trade magazines takes on a whole different level if you look at this. If you read Advertising Age or Adweek or places like that, don't read it as if you're asking what's going on. Read a trade magazine, whether it's Variety or anything, as a sort of view of society. How are they constructing America? How are they constructing this world? And it's fascinating because really they're telling stories, as I said, about what a woman is, what a Hispanic is, what an African American is. These are stories that are told. I don't know if they're true or not, but they're fascinating and they have consequence. Because if you believe that women are X and not Y, you do a media campaign that way, you have creative people doing ads that way, and you begin to reflect back certain ideas about reality. So these are stories that are being told.
Maybe one more question and then we'll...
Okay. I came so far, I can stay. Yes, sir.
So there's also obviously a complementary issue with allowing people to go off and change their profiles, right? I mean, so from a marketing perspective, what's really valuable is if my information is accurate, right? I mean, I go in and I fill out, hey, I'm really interested in Lamborghinis, but I can't afford Lamborghini car parts. I can only afford
So they'll check and see.
So the more you become transparent, the more are you taking away from this whole
right, and so people may get nervous about that too. Everyone likes to upsize themselves, as it were, and that advertisers take that into consideration. The reason Lamborghini advertises, by the way, is not because they think a lot of people are buying Lamborghinis. They advertise in a niche envy sort of thing. They advertise because they want the people who buy Lamborghinis to feel proud that they've bought it. So the ads say to other people, this is a heck of a car, and a person who drives it's really fancy, rather than to try to persuade a person to buy a Lamborghini. It's a very interesting kind of thing. So the notion of reflecting on you, there are going to be a whole lot of implications for even telling people to verify their profiles, to find out about their profiles. Health profiles, we haven't even talked about that, but that's a fascinating and terribly important issue. Because the idea of it is legal in the United States to, in fact, WebMD and Revolution Health have recently come up with the idea they're giving people free health profiles where you can store your health profile. Now, they're not going to start selling it, obviously, to McDonald's, But what they will do when you go to the website is they'll push ads to you, partly based on the profile that you've given them. And again, that has to do with all the stories we've talked about. The idea of if you have diabetes and it's in your health profile, maybe you'll start getting ads from different pharmaceutical firms or machine companies or whatever. Do you want that? What does it mean? See? And so the whole idea of using that information for health purposes raises other fascinating issues.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you for coming.